This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, seldom have we heard good news about the city's pumping system, but this week was an exception as secured funding was announced for a power complex that should help stabilize the city's tormented and frequently overworked drainage system. That news came in the same week when insurance companies learned that the claims from Hurricane Francine should be lower than expected. At the archdiocese, however, the claims from sexual abuse survivors are high, as is the degree of disagreement about how to pay them. There was news about the Pelicans, this time from off the basketball court, as a new network was created that should dramatically increase the team's television regional visibility. We'll look at these stories tonight, as well as the latest on Hollywood South, the local film production industry. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Regal, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Ben Myers, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Go over to Stephanie, because there are now two positions out there regarding the Archdiocese bankruptcy and settlement and the sex abuse scandal. So why don't you sort of tell us what these settlement proposals are like?
So it's a big deal. It's really the next phase of this long-running case, which has been going on for 4 years and 4 months now. Last Friday, late Friday afternoon, the Archdiocese and also the committee that represents all of the abuse survivors in the case filed separate settlement plans. And ideally in a bankruptcy, after all this negotiation and money spent, you would hope that the two sides would come together on a joint plan to settle the debts, or in this case, to pay off the claims, which was really the purpose of their bankruptcy, right? Obviously, they haven't been able to get together, so you have what are called competing plans. Now, the debtor, being the Archdiocese, is the main plan. The plaintiffs didn't go along with it. They filed their own plan, and they're vastly far apart. The church, for now, is offering $62.5 million. That includes $50 million that would come from the Archdiocese, and mostly like cash and investments that they would liquidate. And then $12.5 million from the parishes, which are not technically debtors themselves. They're not in bankruptcy, but they would have to put up money, they would likely be assessed, and they'd have to contribute. The other plan proposed by the committee that represents all 550 abuse survivors would be nearly $1 billion. Now, that plan calls for like $133 million from the parishes, which is a lot, and $84 million from the Archdiocese itself. And the vast majority of that money, $777 million, would come from insurance companies. Now, church insurance companies, of which there are 5, have not agreed to any of this. So that $1 billion figure, while it was great for headlines, is really not at all realistic, and they'll be the first to admit it's not realistic. The church, by contrast, has a provision in its plan that would turn over the right to a trustee in the case. There's a court-appointed trustee to pursue the insurance companies, to sue them basically on behalf of the survivors. So really that $62.5 million, it seems pitifully low, would amount to about $114,000 per survivor, but it would actually be much higher if those insurance, recoveries were ever realized through lawsuits, which has happened in other cases around the country.
Stephanie, in one of your stories this week, you mentioned something that was shocking, okay? And that was the possibility of, if the church has to liquidate, it could include stained glass from the cathedral.
Well, and that's another amazing, right? So what you're talking about was included in the plan that was proposed by the Survivors Committee, and it talked about 500 properties that, well, separately there were dozens of properties, as well as 500 plus pieces of art, antiques, furnitures, fixtures, rings that are contained in a safe, stained glass windows in the St. Louis Cathedral, 17th and 18th century paintings, pieces of religious art that are in the cathedral and in the old Ursuline convent. And the Survivors Committee was suggesting that these could be liquidated to help generate money to pay off some of these claims. I think some of that is a little bit of posturing. Some of that, I think, was intentionally done to embarrass the archdiocese or make it look bad, which it really kind of does, or to scare people or whatnot, because there was no dollar figure, attached to any of it. It was just to show this is the wealth that the church has, and this is what we, think, compared to the suffering that the survivors have gone through, what needs to happen, in other words, for them to be justly compensated.
So in other cases like this around the country, how much have survivors been awarded?
So there have been 37 cases filed over the past 20 years or so. 24 of them have settled. The median settlement amount comes to about $300,000. And honestly, most of these cases do settle. They've become harder to settle in recent years, mostly because the insurers are pushing back.
Are the insurers paying up in any of the cases?
Well, in the early years they did. In the early years they paid plenty. Recently they've been holding off, and that's totally messed things up. But as these cases do move towards settlements, or as in the case of like Camden, New Jersey, they adopted a path similar to that which our archdiocese is proposing. Y'all accept an amount that the survivors and the church agree to pay, and then you can go off separately and sue the insurers. Now, I don't think the insurers in Camden have yet paid, but at least the survivors are now on board with the church to get something.
And so in the church plan, the parishes are part of this settlement. They will have to come up with money?
The parishes are part of the settlement, and it's not entirely clear because both of these plans, remember, they've been under a lot of pressure from the judge. She appointed an outside expert last month to come in and try to move things along and find out why this has been so slow going. So they both had agreed in August to file settlement plans by September 16th, which would have been this past Monday. They filed them a few days early. Both of the plans are incomplete at this point, and there's still a lot of negotiating to go. Even if they were completely complete and everybody was on the same page, it would be months and months and months before this was resolved. I think you're still a year out before this is all settled, if ever. But
there are some parishes that are run by the archdiocese, and other parishes that are run by religious orders, like the Jesuits or the Franciscans. I wonder if they have equal leverage over all the parishes to do this kind of thing.
That's a good question, and I don't really know I mean, I know exactly what you're asking, but I don't know. They all. It's a big family, and it's a web of money and control that kind of goes back and forth. The parishes, the complication with the parishes really at the moment that everybody's closely watching, because yes, as you point out, the parishes will have to put up something, whether it comes from selling off properties or assessing the people in the pews or whatever. But in the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy case, the Sackler family, you may remember, put up $6 billion to shield themselves from future liability, right? They said, we don't want to get sued once this bankruptcy is settled and all the opioid abuse victims get some sort of payment, but we don't want them to come after us. So here's our $6 billion. And the U.S. Supreme Court struck that down. That has implications for the parishes, which in these bankruptcies around the country have been putting up money in return for basically immunity from future prosecution. That's all up in the air. Still very much up in the air, not only here, but in Rochester, Syracuse, Rockville Center, New York, and Long Island. All over, cases that are unsettled are looking at this, and we don't know. So that could totally throw this off.
So it gets even more complicated.
It gets more complicated.
Okay, so we're just in the beginning, but this is a step forward to at least have these two plans.
Definitely the next phase.
All right, thanks a lot, Steph. All right, Ben, let's go on over to you and let's talk drainage, and particularly in the city of New Orleans and Sewage and Water Board. It looks like this substation is going to get the money to be completed.
Right. So the power complex, the much exalted power complex, the much waited for power complex that's being built now, which would power both the drainage and the water pumps, has been missing one final piece of funding, and this affects only the water pumps, the tap water pumps. The city sewage and water board, everybody thought it was going to come through from the state construction budget. There was a political flap at the end of the legislative session in which the mayor criticized lawmakers and some of their new laws directed at the Sewage and Water Board. lawmakers took offense and yanked the money that everyone thought was coming, because the project itself is not controversial, and until that point, paying for it from the construction budget, the capital outlay budget, also was not controversial. So that created a lot of uncertainty. The governor said immediately after that happened that he was going to come up with a solution. That didn't really happen. And then the mayor mentioned at her budget town hall meeting last month that there's a federal grant in the works that no one's talked about until that moment, but it's going to require a local match for $17 million. Where that would come from has been the question, and last week, as she was meeting with other regional leaders after the hurricane with the governor, she was trying to get an answer from him about where this local match would come from, and she has been saying that the city of New Orleans is kind of tapped out now, that they've already contributed $70-some million to the substation, or the power complex, I should say. The substation is just the central part of it. And she repeated that on Wednesday morning at the Sewage and Water Board meeting, saying that the city has a lot of other priorities that it's juggling. Not that they wouldn't eventually maybe come up with some of the money, but it's going to be really hard, and it's not going to happen anyway, right away, and we don't know how we're going to do it. So 4, 5, 6 hours later after that, the city council makes an announcement that says, oh wait, we do have the money. And by the way, part of it is coming from the Sewage and Water Board, which is where the mayor had just been talking about not having the money. So that was whiplash. And then a few hours after that, Mayor Cantrell's chief administrative officer, Gilbert Montano, calls a media briefing to say, yes, this is great. We've been working on this for a while, and this money has been in place, and we're going to do it, and everything's great. So it's been a weird and wild ride with this last piece of money for the complex, but I guess we can all be happy that the money is there.
So the council found the money somewhere then.
What really happened?
Yeah.
Where really was
So,
it? What the heck?
I think that actually what's been going on is the administration and council has been working together for a couple of weeks maybe to find this. Basically, they're trimming it from piece by piece certain projects. We don't know which projects around the city, but it's coming from bond funds that were already spoken for, and they've been very carefully trying to piece that together. I suspect that the mayor, this is just my hunch, but the mayor was maybe trying to not be so public about having found the money so that she could maybe get the state to pitch in, and that didn't work very well. Okay,
so the timeline now, the drainage, the issue, the energy for the drainage pumps, this extra, from the energy complex, that is going to be complete by next year, and then this other money is taking care of the water.
That's right. This has never been about the drainage pumps being powered. That schedule is still set in place for the middle of next summer.
Okay.
It's all been about the tap water pumps.
Okay, and of course this energy complex is going to be more reliable in terms of powering all of those pumps.
We believe that once this is in place, we should never have any more power problems with our pumps in this city. So
Wouldn't that be delightful?
it'd be wonderful.
So are the turbines going to just be retired? Or?
They're going to get a new one, and they might keep around some of the old ones for backup in case the
Okay.
substation needs help.
All righty, Ben, thanks a lot. Complicated, but ultimately it looks like it's going to get done.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right, Stefan, let's go back on over to you because Francine paid us a visit, and so everybody's worried about, okay, what's that going to do to insurance companies? How's it looking?
It's looking pretty good, and it's nice to have something positive to say. It looks like this storm will cost the insurers about $1.5 billion, which is low enough for them to be able to afford without having to tap into the reinsurance market, which of course Lloyd's of London or Berkshire, that's what they look down here. All of a sudden, that's what makes them raise their rates, reassess the risk of underwriting insurance in Louisiana and along the coast. So that's good news. I mean, it was manageable. It was considered moderate by industry standards. Earlier this week, there had only been something like 1,000, and I say only, I mean, it's if you're one of them,
Yeah.
of course, but about 1,000 claims filed with Citizens, which is the insurer of last resort. State Farm had about 1,600 claims. That's primarily because this was more of a water event where there was damage than a wind event. So you didn't see a lot of claims for damaged homes. You just didn't, and that's very, very positive. You know, the eye of the storm went in a coastal rural area that was not hugely populated, so that was very positive. And then the storm diminished in strength fairly quickly, so it didn't cut a huge swath of damage across Metro New Orleans. There was a good amount of flooding in parts of Kenner and Jefferson Parish. There were around 1,000 claims filed earlier this week with the flood program through the NFIP. Right. We don't know what this will mean ultimately for flood rates. You know, flood rates are determined now by this new risk rating 2.0 system. Nobody really quite understands how risk is assessed through that program. There are lawsuits over that. We don't even really know if funding for the federal flood insurance program is secure, and Congress is very dysfunctional and now about to not, be able to shut down the government again in a few months. So there are still lots of questions about the flood insurance piece of it, but for now, the homeowners insurance piece is looking fairly positive. Commissioner Tim Temple said he doesn't think we're going to see rates rise as a result of this storm, which is good because, as we've talked about many times on this show, the rise in homeowners insurance over the past couple of years has been one of the major reasons that the market has so
unsustainable high rates.
That's right, very unsustainable high rates.
Yeah, we're not exhaling quite yet, though, because we're not through this season.
We're not through the season. We could be talking about a storm, maybe a major one next week at this time. Maybe not.
No.
But it's possible.
Well, and how do storms in other areas impact us? Like all the flooding this week in North Carolina as a result of something that wasn't even a storm. Does that impact our rates here?
Well, on the especially along the Gulf Coast, when anywhere along the Gulf Coast that has a major hit is going to impact us. Maybe less so along the Atlantic coast, but in terms of, the homeowners insurance, because if there's a hit on the Gulf Coast, I think Lloyd's of London looks at all of us the same. I mean, New Orleans is probably worse than anybody, but it's the same really, and what the insurance experts had said at the beginning of this season was that, a hit on Mississippi or Alabama or coastal Florida, along the Panhandle would impact us just as poorly, almost, or just as badly as a hit on South Louisiana would. So, none of us are out of the woods yet.
No, all we can do is hope, huh?
Right.
All right, Steph, thanks. Don, over to you. How's Hollywood South looking?
Well, Hollywood South, believe it or not, is 22 years old. The incentive program to bring Hollywood production to Louisiana was created in 2002. And it's had its ups and downs and was doing really well in spite of COVID, actually, maybe because of COVID, because there was so much streaming production that happened and people were shooting and streaming. And then we had the Hollywood writer strike and the Teamster strike and all the strikes of the Hollywood people that really slowed the business down, not just in Louisiana, but everywhere. But in our 22-year history, we've now been ranked the #3 best city to live and work in as a movie maker by the Movie Maker magazine, and the 4th largest film production hub behind New York, LA, and Atlanta. We didn't used to be behind Atlanta, right. But we have come behind Atlanta. In terms of numbers, just to know where we've been over the last 3 years, it's really been slow. I mean, in my other world as a realtor, I often help find housing for directors and actors and filmmakers and personal trainers and whoever's coming into town, and that business has all but dried up. We got good news that it's supposed to be coming back. 2022, the spend in the city, the overall spend for movies was only $11 million. Wow. 2023, it was up to $16 million, and this year so far we're at $28 million. So it's going up almost double every year and coming back. And we have 5 productions slated to start in October in the city of New Orleans. One is a Fox production of Kitchen Nightmares, but the others are all major motion films. Music Box, which is the Five Nights at Freddy's 2, is in pre-production starting in October. A movie called tentatively Charlie Harper, also in pre-production. So things are happening. And then we have the New Orleans Film Festival that's coming back in October of this year, at which there will be a screening of the documentary A King Like Me, which is about Zulu. at the Orpheum. So that's from a city perspective. From a state perspective, things are also on the up and up. The Louisiana Economic Development Fund chips into the movie industry and helps create a sustainable workforce here. They've recently granted LSU $200,000 to help expand faculty there for their Bachelor of Fine Arts program in digital and virtual filmmaking. We currently have at LSU and also in process at Loyola a virtual production studio. The best way to describe it is it's kind of how video games are made. It's a room that screens all sides and floor and ceiling, and you can kind of transport to a location without being on location, and it's much more realistic. So we're training our workforce both at LSU and Loyola. Future workforce is happening. There's also the Louisiana Economic Development Fund gave nearly $500,000 to COOL, which is creating outstanding opportunities locally, and it's a program that is creating hands-on training and mentoring for middle school and high school students, also some free summer programming for at-risk kids to really build up that workforce. So we really do have a sustainable infrastructure, both from the workforce perspective and the studios and the sound stages. Chris Stelly with Louisiana Economic Development told me today, you know, if they come back or when they come back, we are ready to roll. Like, we have the people. I did, though, talk to a friend who's a set designer who said, I'm looking for a new work because there's just not enough work for me here right now.
That was the question I was going to ask. I mean, because it's been such a downturn, how much have we lost in terms of industry
the
personnel?
question is how many people will come back to it who have found something else temporarily and haven't moved away. You know, if we have 5 movies coming in the next month, there obviously is a workforce to support them. So that's 5, but it's at some points in time we've been at 35 at one point in time. So hopefully we're building back to that. Not there yet by any stretch.
Okay, well, hopefully it will, because it really did employ a lot of people, you know, in this area who have been hurting.
And
with
good
the
jobs,
downturn.
not just employed, but employed with high-paying good jobs. And kind of fun to see the stars around town and that sort of
that
thing
too. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we do hope that there is certainly this uptick. That is good news. All right, E, over to you, because other news now, a whole new network for sports.
Yeah, and this is the biggest story that I think people realize. I think it has a major impact on the economy in the long run. You know, Major League Sports have always wanted to have some kind of broadcast component connected with them as a way of generating interest outside their market. It's always been there. You know, baseball always had some radio station somewhere. I remember as a kid listening to the Houston Astros games and saying, "Boy, I want to go to Houston for one of those games." Well, only time I've ever said I wanted to go to Houston. Okay. By the way, with the Hornets and then the Pelicans have always had a TV broadcast unit and some kind of a radio operation. They were good. They were good quality productions, but they didn't just reach very far. They didn't, you know, go deep into the market. Most recently, the TV had something called Bally Sports Network, which was cable-based and obviously connected with the Bally Company. It's having bankruptcy problems, but again, it doesn't reach very far. So what happened this week? What was announced is that Gray Communications, which is a company that's headquartered in Atlanta, which owns WVUE, Fox 8 here, has been part of putting together something called the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Now, Gray already has TV stations across the South. It has, I think, like 8 in Louisiana. Every major market except Lafayette, for some reason, is because I'm in East Texas and Arkansas and then across the Mississippi. So they're putting together a network which, in effect, will broadcast all of the Pelicans games on the VHF channel, not the cable channel, but the one that you watch for free. And so it'll broadcast all those games. Now, last year, Channel 8 started carrying on its own, like I think it was like 10 of the Pelicans games, and apparently they were very, very successful. That was apart from the cable operation. So that showed people, if you give people free basketball, they're going to watch. It's out there. And so there has been a real incentive to put it together. So it's going to be a powerful force, I think, because what the Pelicans people saying is that our ticket sales are okay within the immediate market, but not so much outside the market. And this is going to reach further. This is going to add like 4.1 million more home units.
So this will be all along the Gulf Coast?
Yeah, all along the Gulf Coast. Dennis Lush estimates that the population along the Gulf Coast that they'll be getting this is like 7 million. And he said that's about equivalent to Chicago. And that's been the problem that the Pelicans have had. The Pelicans are one of maybe the smallest market in the NBA, and so you compete against New York and Chicago in Los Angeles, so we can say, hey, we're as big as you, you know.
So we'll be able to see all the Pelican games broadcast to us, like you said, free over the airwaves, except for the ones that are...
There are a few games that are always looped off by the networks that have the national rights.
Okay.
I think it's TBS network, and those nobody can have because they belong to networks. But besides those, yeah.
But the network will have other programming on as well, not just Pelican games.
Oh,
right?
yeah. They call it an entertainment, even though I said
Interesting to see.
And so you can have that, you're going to have Channel 8 show. But the other thing that wasn't part of the news this week, but this was a few weeks ago, but I think it's really big, is that WWL Radio is going to be carrying the Pelicans game, which is where it should have been all along. I mean, this is like big, powerful, 50,000 watt station. Usually a radio station hasn't wanted the NBA because they got like 80 games. It's like that's 80 dates a week. Okay, you know, that's knocked out. I suspect Gail Benson may have had an influence in this. I don't know for sure, okay? But with the Pelicans and all that.
She wants people to watch her Pelicans.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. But if to have NBA games on the Pelicans, it's really good. I just want to quickly read one quote from
quickly, because we're running out of time.
From Gail Benson. She says, look, I'm a never sell the team. She says, I feel like if you cashed out and you sold everything, what would you do with the money? You need to have some purpose in life, and I feel like this is my purpose. And Tom Benson and I thought of it to see it through. So there should be a stained glass in the St. Louis Cathedral to Gail and Tom Benson.
With Gail and Tom, and thank you, Gail and Tom, that's for sure. Okay, E, real quick.
Yeah, another blessed Levit is on September 10th. There was people have been asking, when are they going to have more giraffes born on the North Shore? And there was one that was born at the Global Wildlife Center,
God.
September 10th.
Franny?
It was born the day before Francine. At first, they didn't know what her gender would be. Once they determined her gender, they said, well, let's call it Francine.
Look at that face, how cute.
For sure.
Okay, well, welcome, Franny. Okay, Stephanie, over to you.
Yeah, so yesterday the City Council said they wanted another study on how to make Canal Street great again. This will be the third study in about 30 years. And business owners said, look, we're glad for the attention, but really a big step would just be to clean it up, get the sidewalks fixed, the lights working, and get some police making sure that people aren't dealing drugs in the middle of the street.
Basic stuff first. All right, thanks, Steph. Don?
As Stephanie alluded to, all eyes need to stay on the tropics, just in case. Don't spend this weekend restocking your freezer. Just don't.
Just keep the ears open, be alert. All right, Ben?
Short-term rental exceptions. These are special exceptions that people could get to the permit limitations that were passed a year and a half ago. The exceptions have now been tabled, so they are sticking to strict 1 permit per square block limitations.
All right, so do we have this resolved yet, or everything stuff's still in court, right?
Oh, everything's always in court. Yeah, that's still happening, yeah.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.